Let's start by creating an app called Distinct2. Like the Distinct1 app, I installed Equatable, Flutter Redux, and Redux. Uncommented avoid print among linked rules in analysis options.yaml file. Almost the same app, but with some differences. First of all, I mentioned that state is handled by making it an object. That's why we create a separate state object that did not exist in Distinct1 in a file called appstate.dart. I created a class called fstate and declared a counter variable of type int as a member, and I created a constructor. And I created a factory constructor fstate.initial that will be used as the initial state. The fstate.initial factory constructor returns an fstate instance with counter equal to 0. And since the state should not be mutable, I also created a copy of the function to create a new state every time an action occurs. I have two actions identical to Distinct1 app, increment 1 and increment 0. Reducer is a little different. The copied function of state is used to generate a new state. If the action is increment 1 action, use the copied function of the state to generate a new state whose counter value is state.counter plus 1 and return it. If the action is increment 0 action, use the copied function of the state to generate new state whose counter value is state.counter and return it. Let's take a look at the main.dart file. When creating the store, give fstate.initial factory constructor as initial state. My homepage is the same. Let's take a quick look at the view model. I have declared a counter variable of type int. However, instead of declaring a counter variable of type int, we can declare state of type fstate. We'll come back to this later, as different declarations can have different result. In the fromStore static function, to get the value of the counter variable of type int, you need to read the counter value of store.state. We only include counter in props. Let's run the simulator and test it. When the +1 button is pressed, the counter on the screen is incremented by 1 and building is output to the console at the same time. Let's press +0 this time. There is no change on the screen and no building is displayed on the console. It's the result we want. So far, it seems that all problems have been resolved smoothly. Let's modify the underscore view model for a moment. Change the counter of int type to the state of fstate type. Replace counter argument with state. Change the counter property to state and give store.state as the value. I included state instead of counter in props. And in the builder callback of my homepage, modify vm.counter to vm.state.counter. Now that the modification is complete, let's run it after a hard restart. When the +1 button is pressed, the counter on the screen is incremented by 1 and building is output to the console at the same time. Let's press +0 this time. While there is no change on the screen, building is being output to the console. It's not the result we want. Why did this happen? The problem is with fstate. We did not override the equality operator and hash code. This means that we are using reference equality when comparing fstate. And let's look at the reducer. When the action is increment 0 action, a new state is generated using the copied function of the state. So in terms of referential equality, it cannot be the same state. If so, we need to put the equality check function we want in fstate as well. Select generate equatable in .data class generator extension. Now, if the counter has the same value, the two states are considered equal. Let's do a hard restart and run it. Let's press the +0 button. The screen is not updated, but you can see that the builder callback is not executed either. So what do we need to remember at this point? The distinct property of store connector is very important for performance optimization. By giving the value of the distinct property to true, performance optimization is not obtained by itself. When the value of the distinct property is set to true, to get the expected performance optimization properly, you need to override the equality operator and hash code. But you cannot get the performance optimization effect by simply overriding it. In the case of function, it should be excluded from override target. Otherwise, since a different view model is created every time, it always reveals even if there is no change in the corresponding state. In conclusion, I can say that developers need to be careful to achieve performance optimization effects. In particular, when the state is an object in the view model, if the unit constituting the object is a primitive type, it is recommended to configure it in a form that directly accesses the primitive value.